Guess what? One of the most influential inventions in modern history costs almost nothing to make. It doesn't explode, it doesn't fire, it doesn't move. But it reshaped continents, ended ways of life, changed warfare, and redefined what it means to be free to move. This is the story of barbed wire, the invention that proved control doesn't need power, just persistence. This is Guess What, where everyday objects turn out to have very sharp histories. Before barbed wire, controlling land was expensive. Fences were made of wood, stone, hedge. All of them required labor, maintenance, money. And on the vast plains of North America, traditional fencing simply didn't work. There wasn't enough timber, stone was scarce, and hedges took years to grow. For centuries, land, especially grassland, remained relatively open. People moved. Animals moved. Borders were flexible. That openness wasn't accidental, it was structural, and it was about to end. As settlers moved west in the 1800s AD, a problem became obvious. How do you control animals and people on massive, flat land, cheaply? Cattle roamed freely. Farmers couldn't protect crops. Ranchers couldn't define boundaries. Violence broke out over grazing rights. The land wasn't lawless. It was uncontainable. What was needed wasn't a wall. It was something lighter, cheaper, portable, something you could deploy quickly. The breakthrough comes in the 1870s AD. Several inventors experimented with spiked wire designs, but the version that worked best and spread fastest is credited to Joseph Glidden. His design? Twisted two wires together, locked sharp barbs in place, was cheap to mass produce, was strong enough to deter livestock. It wasn't elegant, it was effective. And effectiveness is contagious. Barbed wire spread across the American West with astonishing speed, miles at a time. Barbed wire didn't just fence animals, it fenced possibility. The open range collapsed. Ranchers enclosed land. Farmers protected crops. Property lines hardened. For Native American tribes, this was catastrophic. Movement was restricted. Hunting routes were cut. Traditional lifeways were disrupted, not by armies, but by wire. Barbed wire didn't need soldiers. It enforced itself. And once land is divided cheaply, it stays divided. The transition wasn't peaceful. The late 1800s AD saw what became known as the fence-cutting wars. Ranchers cut wire. Farmers restrung it. Shots were fired. Laws were passed. Eventually, the wire won. Not because it was moral, but because it was economical. Barbed wire was control at industrial scale. Then someone had a darker idea. If barbed wire could stop cattle, could it stop people? By the early 20th century, militaries answered that question. In World War I, barbed wire became a defining feature of trench warfare. It channeled enemy movement, slowed advances, and turned open ground into death zones. Machine guns killed. Barbed wire decided where people died. This wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of delay. And delay is lethal. Barbed wire arrived at the exact moment the world was becoming industrial. Factories expanded. Railroads spread. Governments scaled up control. Barbed wire fit perfectly. It allowed a small number of people to control vast areas without guards or patrols. Before barbed wire, enforcing boundaries required labor. After barbed wire, enforcement became passive. The wire did the work. This is why it spread far beyond farms and battlefields. into infrastructure, prisons, and borders. It was control that didn't argue back. Barbed wire doesn't just injure, it intimidates. It signals, you are not welcome, you are not trusted, and crossing will hurt. Unlike walls, it doesn't hide what it does. It shows you. That visibility matters. Barbed wire works as much on the mind as the body. By the 20th century AD, barbed wire took on a new meaning. It became inseparable from prison camps, detention centers, and forced confinement. It wasn't always the instrument of violence, but it was always present. Barbed wire marks who is inside and who is allowed to leave. Its symbolism is now so powerful that seeing it alone communicates confinement. No explanation required. Let's clear up a few myths. Myth: barbed wire was invented for war. Reality: it was invented for agriculture. Myth: it's designed to kill. Reality: it's designed to deter and delay. Injury is the mechanism. Myth: it's outdated. Reality: it's still used worldwide because it's cheap, durable, and effective. Barbed wire survives because it works. That's the uncomfortable truth. Despite advances in technology, barbed wire remains everywhere. Why? Because it solves a basic problem. How do you control space at scale without constant enforcement? Barbed wire doesn't sleep. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't require supervision. It's passive power. And passive power is hard to replace. Before barbed wire, freedom of movement was limited by geography. After barbed wire, it was limited by design. Freedom became something you had to be allowed. Lines on maps turned into lines on land. Crossing them now had consequences, not legal ones, physical ones. Barbed wire doesn't get statues, it doesn't get monuments, but its legacy is everywhere. In borders, in property lines, in prisons, in war zones. It proved that control doesn't require complexity, just repetition. Barbed wire isn't evil, but it isn't neutral either. It reflects how societies choose order over openness, efficiency over freedom, and permanence over flexibility. It's cheap, and sometimes the cheapest solutions leave the deepest scars. So the next time you see barbed wire stretched across a field or lining a fence, remember, you're looking at one of the most influential inventions of the modern world. That's today's episode of Guess What? If you enjoyed walking carefully through history with me, hit subscribe, because next time, who knows what we'll uncover? Until then, stay curious and watch where you step.